Just finding my way back after vacation. Appreciate you joining me today just on 740 KVOR and wherever you scroll, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, with the NCAA tournament continuing on Extra Sports 1300. Of course, you could stream the show on KVOR through the digital streaming app, which is free to download and free to use, and sponsored by Diversus Health, mental health and well-being for all. I do have a veritable cornucopia of sports topics awaiting you today, and I'd love to get your thoughts at 719-247-1313. You could call or text them in. Now, it is, and if you're a longtime listener of the show, you will know that what happened earlier this week, always happens. I would say overall, I miss very few days. I'm usually here 5 days a week, unless I'm traveling. But it never fails whenever that day comes, however rare, something major always happens. So it's certainly nice for the Denver Broncos to basically lay comatose for a few weeks of free agency while I have a show. And then the minute I board a plane to go to New Orleans to take my boys on vacation, they decide to make what is the most significant move of the offseason in the National Football League. Because getting Jalen Waddle will do for the Broncos exactly what acquiring Aaron Gordon did for the Denver Nuggets back in 2021. It makes them whole. It makes them complete. And it makes them a legitimate championship contender. Not only is Jalen Waddle a bona fide number one receiver, which is something that the Denver Broncos organization has not had since the late Demaryius Thomas, but it puts everyone else in that wide receiver room in their place, in their proper place. The last few years, you've been kind of tilting your head, squinting, trying to see a number one wide receiver in Courtland Sutton. But that guy just isn't there. He's not on the level of Waddle or Jefferson or Chase. And I know there are levels to this. They're not all number one receivers are all at the same level, but Courtland Sutton was not a number one wide receiver. What he becomes now, playing opposite Jalen Waddle, is arguably the best number two receiver in the NFL. And now you can keep Marvin Mims, and I've always said this about Marvin Mims. There's a workload, there's a balance that has to go along with it. He's not the kind of guy that is going to be effective the more you feed him the ball. The whole thing with Marvin Mims is actually the less he touches it, the more effective he is. Right? You could use him in the deep passing game. You could use him on some of these gadget plays. I've said he's a Percy Harvin type of weapon that the Broncos have deployed, but you can't rely on him to be every down in the formation, getting looks. That just it takes away some of the effectiveness and the punch that comes along with giving Marvin Mims the ball if you're asking him to be an every down receiver like a Courtland Sutton. You see the domino effect here. And then it leaves, instead of trying, and I think so many Broncos fans are trying to make Troy Franklin or this past year, Pat Bryant, like make them into a legitimate third option. And I think they're much better suited to just be, depth guys. Maybe they turn into something, maybe they pop, and it just gives the Broncos that much more depth. But the Broncos were in a tough spot relying on those guys, needing those guys to help make their offense more dynamic. Now they don't have to do that. And if one of those two guys emerges, then the Broncos are all the better for it. But that's what Aaron Gordon did for the Denver Nuggets. Not only did he give them something that they needed in terms of who he was as a player, but now it allowed everyone else on the court to do what they do best and be in their proper roles. And that's what Jalen Waddle does for this Broncos offense. And talking about the skill set that Waddle brings to the table, I don't know if you could build a receiver that fits what Sean Payton's offense does more than Waddle. And Davis Webb is going to be calling plays now, but it's still Sean Payton's offense. Still the same ideas. And when you have a guy that can truly separate in the deep passing game, now you don't have those kind of 50-50 balls that Bo Nix is throwing up to Cortland Sutton. And yeah, with Sutton's size, you have a certain level of belief that he'll come down with them. But Cortland Sutton's not open on these plays. Jalen Waddle will be open. So you have that downfield. And then you have a guy who has been incredibly effective in the screen game and playing close to the line of scrimmage. I know Broncos fans, one of their biggest pet peeves about Sean Payton this year was the screen game. But the reason why that was a problem in war on the nerves of Broncos fans was not because it was the wrong play call for that particular moment. It was because they did not have a receiver that was capable of turning that into something. Yards after the catch. Jalen Waddle averages about 6 yards after catch since he came into the league. Jalen Waddle, if the Broncos get stuffed on first down or take a false start penalty, and now they're behind the chains, they can draw up that screen pass to Jalen Waddle, and he can turn it into something, and all of a sudden the Broncos are now in third and manageable. How much did that come up throughout the year? The necessity for the Broncos to not be behind the chains. So in a way, Jalen Waddle gives you a guy that can keep you ahead of the chains, but he's also a guy more so than they have had since Sean Payton arrived in Denver, a guy that can bail you out. A guy that can make a play on second and long to get you in a third and manageable. So they have in Jalen Waddle, for what they want to do offensively, almost the perfect player. Just as Aaron Gordon was the perfect player for what the Denver Nuggets needed after an appearance in the Western Conference Finals. You see the parallels between these two moves. Now, I wondered if the Broncos were having a bit of sticker shock. If that's why they were sitting on the sidelines when free agency opened up. You saw Travis Achan go down to New Orleans for $13 million a year. The Chiefs paid even more for Kenneth Walker. Howie Roseman, I don't think, was ever as serious as people wanted him to be about trading A.J. Brown, and had a big price tag on A.J. Brown. So when I put all these guys together, I thought, well, this is the reason why the Denver Broncos are sitting on the sideline. They're trying to be frugal. They're trying to not give up a ton of draft capital or give up a ton of their cap space in order to get somebody. But in reality, now that this move has been made, and when you see the haul that Miami received in return, it wasn't sticker shock. It wasn't that the Broncos thought that these other teams were greatly overpaying for the players that they got. They were waiting for their own, if you want to call it an overpay, they were waiting for that for the right guy. And that was something that happened with the Denver Nuggets, because I kept saying, and Chris Middleton was the number one guy. I'm like, well, why aren't the Nuggets landing Chris Middleton? Why don't they make him a free agent offer? There was these free agents that would fit well with the Denver Nuggets that Tim Connolly just let go by, and you wondered, are they being cheap? Do they not see what I see in these players? And now, with the benefit of hindsight, certainly, you see, no, it's not that they didn't like any of these players. A lot of Broncos friendly media will have you believe that, oh, what a ridiculous overpay for Achane or for Kenneth Walker. They're just towing the company line. The Broncos were willing to pay, but they were only willing to pay for the guy that was the exact right fit. And that's Jalen Waddle. And the Broncos have been sniffing around. This didn't come out of nowhere. They've been sniffing around Jalen Waddle. And it was a combination of, are the Broncos willing to pay that price, and how inclined is Miami to move him? And I said at the trade deadline, when everything went down the tubes for the Dolphins and they fired their GM and the fire sale in a lot of people's minds was coming, I said, I just don't see why Miami would part with Jalen Waddle. Because if they're going to move on from Tua, and if they're going to get into the draft and get a young quarterback soon, don't you want Jalen Waddle? So some combination, it could be both, it could be one or the other, of the Broncos upping their offer to 4 draft picks or 3 in a swap, whatever it turned out to be. Or it was Miami going, you know, if we can get this kind of a haul, we got to move on from them. And I guess it's kind of two sides of the same coin here. The Broncos may have offered just enough to move Miami off of their stance that they didn't want to get rid of Jalen Waddle. And now they have, and I like the move for Miami. Like, yeah, I don't know if they're going to end up with Jalen Waddle, but this is the gamble you have to pay, because if you're where the Dolphins are right now and they have so many needs, you got to give up something to address those other things. And what they found out when they were willing to trade some guys, not Waddle, but the others, was that nobody was willing to pay what they wanted. So they had to part with something of value. Out from the outside, it doesn't look like it makes a ton of sense when you pay Malik Willis what you pay him to be your quarterback, and then you get rid of his number one receiver. But Miami has so many more problems than this, and they are going into a draft with a lot of capital that is very deep at wide receiver. And the brain trust there is coming over from Green Bay, which over the last few years has done a good job of bringing in skilled position guys. Not saying that any of them are going to turn out to be Jalen Waddle, but again, this is what you need to do if you're the Miami Dolphins. It would be very hard to turn down that trade package. And for the Denver Broncos, you can't say it's not worth it. We can't go through the first 2-3 weeks of free agency wondering if anybody's even minding the store with the Denver Broncos. Are they just on auto renew with all of their internal free agents? You can't go from that to, wow, they overpay for Jalen Waddle. You want them to make a significant move. You want them to add perhaps the missing piece. They got to pay for it. And that's what I was hammering the Broncos on, because I thought that they weren't willing to pay that price. They clearly are. So I have to retract my statement. This is a no-brainer addition for the Denver Broncos. It ties everything together. It gives Bo Nix the one thing that all of these young quarterbacks need. They need a bona fide go-to weapon. When the chips are down, who you going to throw to? Too many times we saw this year, Bo Nix's options just weren't what they needed to be. But now he's got the number one wide receiver, and it's not just what Jalen Waddle in himself can do, what Bo Nix and Jalen Waddle can do together. It's what now Cortland Sutton's going to be able to do, and Marvin Mims is going to be able to do, with Jalen Waddle getting the attention that he will undoubtedly get in a Denver Broncos uniform. The impact of this move is that now it gives the Broncos a chance to essentially foolproof their regression that I think was coming in 2026. You look at all the one-score games that the Denver Broncos played in, and the key to keep from regressing like Kansas City did this past year is to not get the same results, because those are essentially a coin flip game. You can't bet on having the most one-score wins of any team in NL history. That the Denver Broncos, as well coached as they might be, as talented as they may be, it's not sustainable. So the answer was, don't play in as many one-score games. And with Jalen Waddle, with his dynamism and what he could unlock in the Broncos offense, they won't be in as many one-score games next year. They'll be able to pull away from some of these inferior opponents. I think with this move, the Broncos, if you didn't believe they were there already, they remain the team to beat in the AFC West. And I don't think there is a team in the AFC that has helped themselves as much as Denver has with this move, outside of the Ravens signing Trey Hendrickson. That is another move at this level. But look at some of the other teams, like a Buffalo. They got DJ Moore, nice player. I think it's an upgrade. Broncos did better. And they keep themselves cemented as one of the teams on the short list to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. This move is absolutely what they needed to do. And you have seen in recent Colorado sports history what a move like this can do. Jalen Waddle is to the Broncos what Aaron Gordon is to the Denver Nuggets. Take your thoughts. 719-247-1313. Just getting going on this Friday edition of the show. Coming up next, you'll hear from the new head coach of the Air Force men's basketball team, Joe Crispin, here on 740 KVOR. It looks like the Cinderella run for Miami of Ohio is going to end before it even begins here. Keep you updated on the goings on at the NCAA tournament. Of course, you can hear the games right now on Extra Sports 1300. Miami of Ohio down big at the half, down by 20 to Tennessee. More on that coming up in a little bit, and a crazy finish to regulation, at least, between Kentucky and Santa Clara. So we'll keep an eye on what else is going on in the NCAA tournament. Of course, here one day in the future, Air Force fans would love to be talking about the Falcons being in the NCAA tournament again. It has been since the Bizdelic days that they have been in this tournament, and the latest person to be tasked with leading them to that place is Joe Crispin, as the school announced this week that a member of Penn State staff will be taking the job here in Colorado Springs. My colleague Jim Arthur, that you hear mornings here on 740 KVOR, had a chance to chat with Coach Crispin. And I think the first thing is, and I talked about this last week, you know, this idea that it can't be done. Now, I saw during the Mount West tournament some tweets out there that how can Air Force possibly hope to compete in today's era of college basketball? And I brought up the fact that hockey's been able to do it. I've been calling games for a women's basketball team that went to the Mount West title game. Troy Calhoun has led Air Force to great seasons, bowl eligibility, knocking off Power 4 schools, all that kind of stuff. Don't tell me that men's basketball is the one sport at the academy that just can't happen. I don't believe it. Now, is the mountain to climb greater in a sport where one player can make so much of a difference? Yes. It's probably the most difficult of all the jobs at the academy, is being the head coach of the men's basketball team. I will concede that, but I will not concede the idea that it can't be done. Because just like one player makes so much difference for a lot of these teams that you're watching in the NCAA tournament, one player can make a big difference for Air Force as well. So I think the first battle that the new head coach of this team has to win is intellectually, to be like, this can be done as long as the right plan is in place. And the thing that should hearten you the most, if you are an Air Force fan, is what Joe Crispin said about the idea that you simply cannot win at Air Force.
I like the impossible task, if you will. I think there's a lot of people out there who say, this is so hard to do, and can it be done at Air Force? And the more I heard that, the more attracted I was to it.
And that, again, that's more than half the battle. You have to have a coach that truly believes it's possible, that's taking over the job, not just because they want to become a Division I men's basketball coach, but because they believe that they can be successful at the Air Force Academy. So if that's even more than half the battle, the question becomes, well, what's the rest of it? Well, the rest of it is how you're going to do it. You believe you can. How? Here's Joe Crispin on his offensive philosophy.
Pace is the first way we create that, is getting the ball up quicker than anybody and looking to attack and putting players on the attack. I love to shoot the three, but I also love layups and free throws, just like every other coach in the country. And what I often say is we're trying to play basketball and get the kind of shots everyone else is trying to get, but we're going to get them quicker.
I would say a lot of, at least most of the teams that I cover at the academy, that I know best at the academy, it's actually in many ways about slowing the pace, right? Air Force with the option, ball control offense, more often than not. The women's basketball team on the offensive end in the half court, they look to limit the number of possessions, shorten the game instead of lengthening it. Fewer possessions, not more. Air Force hockey is very defensive oriented, goal prevention. If you're going to play a fast pace, inevitably you're going to give up opportunities on the other end. There's just no way to play at an incredible pace. And I'll use an extreme example in this NCAA tournament. Take Alabama, for instance. Okay, Alabama offensively is terrific, but defensively they can't, they under Nate Oates, they just haven't been a great defensive team. Why? Because you speed up the pace. There are more possessions, more opportunities for your opponents to score. It's just, that's the trade-off that you make. So what Joe Crispin is saying sounds a little counterintuitive, at least from what you expect out of Air Force teams, which are trying to not get into track meets, which are not trying to get into high-scoring games. But there's this other side of it, and it fits well with what I see on the women's side. If the pace speeds up because you turn other teams over, I think that is going to be the key for this Air Force team under Joe Crispin, is creating turnovers. And I see that on the women's side. Yeah, if they get in a half-court set, it will be interesting to see how quickly Air Force looks to get their shot. But the easy way to play with tempo and to play with pace and to get up and down the floor is to turn teams over. And that's something that Joe Crispin wants his teams to do.
Just from a sheer defensive standpoint, I mean, we're going to press 9 times out of 10 to be aggressive, but also to try to be disruptive and kind of make the game more like what we want the game to be.
That's how you create that pace. You're not going to be able to match the top teams, even with what the Mount West is going to look like moving forward. You're not going to match the shot making of these teams shot for shot. You have to create some kind of an advantage for yourself. And to me, it's creating turnovers. That's how you get to your shot faster than the defense wants you to, because you're on a fast break the other way. But what will be very interesting to see is what they do in the half court, because that's going to be the game plan. I can already project ahead. I can see other teams that come into Clune Arena, they're going to say, take care of the basketball and force Air Force to beat you in the half court. That's where other teams' advantage lies with their 8 transfers that they were able to bring in, which I continue to say the transfer portal is a much bigger impediment to the success of Air Force in every sport than the NIL of it all. But that's going to be the game plan. Can what Joe Crispin brings to the table try to negate that and allow Air Force to dictate the terms of the game. If they do that, they'll be competitive in the new look Mountain West. Now, I think one thing that people are kind of looking at when it comes to Crispin is the resume. Very successful at the Division III level, was kind of down the bench a little bit at Penn State. He's not the lead assistant at Penn State. He's down there a little bit. And I think there's a couple of realities that have to be faced here. As much as I refuse to believe that you can't win at Air Force, a lot of people aren't cut out for the challenge that is Air Force. Air Force is very fortunate right now to have a group of coaches, whether it's Kaz with the baseball team or Frank with the hockey team, Stacey McIntyre with the women's basketball team, Troy Calhoun with the football team. These are people that get what it is to be a coach at Air Force and embrace it and try to work within those parameters. Not everybody is going to want to do that. So that's going to pare down the field a little bit. But also, if you're Air Force, you kind of got to bet on future potential. I know Joe Crispin has been a head coach, has led his own program, but not at this level. So there's going to be a growing process. He's going to grow into being a Division I head coach, but you have to bet on that. You have to bet on someone who is enthusiastic, excited, young, and is ready for the fight, so to speak. And everything that I have read and heard, and I look forward to talking to him myself and getting more of his thoughts on this. It seems like Joe Crispin is up for the challenge. He's excited about it, and he's in it for the long haul. You know, you see this all the time in mid-major college basketball, but you extend this out to even, you know, the NBA or the NFL or the NHL. If you're a team that's in kind of a bad spot, right? In order for you to get a very talented coach, you can't get the resume and the experience to go along with that. You're going to have to bet on somebody, on the upside of somebody. And I think that's what Air Force has done. So Joe Crispin, the new head coach of the Air Force men's basketball team, he will meet the media formally coming up at the end of the month out at Falcon Stadium. And I very much look forward to having him on this radio program for a deep dive and a conversation about his plans. But talking to people last night at the WNIT game and reading some things from back east out of the Penn State program, a lot of excitement about what Joe Crispin can be. Take your thoughts on the news and your first impressions of the new head coach of the Falcons. 719-24-7, 1313. Coming up next, speaking of basketball, last night, a remarkable season for Air Force women's basketball. Truly came to an end last night, but it showed a glimpse into what the future looks like of that program. That's next here on 740 KVOR. While we're on the topic of Air Force, shouts to the Air Force gymnastics team. What a haul. 3 members of the All Mount West first team. They got the gymnast of the year and the coach of the year. And let you peek in behind the curtain, looking to get members of the outstanding Air Force gymnastics team on the show in the coming days. So look out for that. But terrific haul in the all conference honors for Air Force. You never know how a team is going to respond to a disappointment like Air Force had that last game out in Vegas, right? Losing to Colorado State in the Mount West title game, being so close to the ultimate goal to go to the NCAA tournament and fall short, only to be invited to another postseason tournament. But that was a tournament that this team had been in before in the WNIT. And you just, whether you want to call it the hangover effect, whatever it is, I was very curious last night to see how Air Force would come out and handle all of that stuff. The thrill ride that was Vegas, ending with the disappointment of that last game, thinking maybe your season is over, and now it's not over because you've been invited to the NIT. And unfortunately, I just don't think that Air Force came out the way that they needed to last night against Northern Colorado. Northern Colorado looked to be the team that was champing at the bit a little bit more to play more basketball. And the story behind UNC is that they got bounced early. They were a top 3 seed in the Big Sky, and they got a bye, and then they immediately got eliminated. That team last night came out like a team that was looking to rectify that. And they were going up against an Air Force team that at least collectively the 5 starters they began the game with were a little just slow getting to it. Right? To get up for another basketball game after they poured everything into that run in the Mount West tournament. And they were down by double digits in short order, stayed there most of the game. And yes, they ended up losing and had their season ended for real this time. But in the second half of that game, especially the fourth quarter, you saw a glimpse into what this team is going to be next year. Because the group that rallied Air Force, that nearly pulled that game out and advanced to the second round of the WNIT, those players are going to be on this team next year. Keely O'Halloran, Jada McNabb, Alexis Cortez, Jordan Devon. These players, and the list goes on, obviously, these are the players that are going to be leading this team next year. And while losing Emily Adams and especially Milani Perry will be very difficult for this team to do, you kind of had moments there in the second half and at the end of the game where you went, oh, the cupboard's not going to be bare. Jada McNabb was the Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year. Brett Clay, who did not play, and I think they missed her dearly last night because UNC had 2 point guards, essentially. And one of them they did a very good job on, the other one not so much. And I think Brett Clay, with how good of a defender she is, could have really helped. But she was in a walking boot last night, which would make her playing basketball incredibly difficult to do. So that was a blow certainly to Air Force before the game even started. But you have Alexis Cortez, and Brett Clay. Brett Clay named to the all-freshman team this year are going to be two defensive focal points for this team, along with Jada McNabb. And Keely O'Halloran, who has been battling all season. It has not been a season that she would remember fondly from an individual standpoint. But knowing her, no one's going to work harder this offseason than Keely to make sure that her shot starts falling again this upcoming season. So, we'll see how everything shakes out. But I think you can see that, yes, Air Force got to the top, the absolute peak that they could with this particular group, getting to the Mountain West title game. But I think they don't start at step one next year. And I think one of the lessons they learned this season is they can't wait till midway through conference play to turn it on. Like they got to get going sooner than that. Use the non-conference to ramp yourself up. But once that Mount West season begins, and it's going to be a different looking, Mount West next year, but it's still going to be difficult. But you got to get going right as conference play begins. So I think armed with that, and also with so many players that have contributed to this team, I thought Alexis Cortez was really good out in Vegas. Keely O'Halloran, they don't get to the Mount West title game without her. Jada McNabb has been their rock all season long. These are players that have played in these big games, helped Air Force win these big games out in Vegas, and they're going to be better for it. So it was unfortunate that you didn't see that group ultimately push through to the end, and they just dug themselves too deep of a hole. Couldn't make their way out of it. And I will, since it's been kind of the theme, whether it's the Dominican Republic or it's Canada and hockey, that it's a 4 out of 7 game series. Air Force wins that series, but they had to be at their best in one game. They weren't. And credit to UNC, they were. They came out with more passion, more hunger. They came out and executed better. And they deserve to win. But that comeback that Air Force made in the second half, it made me feel like next year this team could do some fun stuff too. But the season ultimately comes to an end at the hands of Northern Colorado. And UNC will move on and travel to South Dakota this weekend. 719-247-1313. We'll continue with this Friday edition of Drive Time Sports right after this on 740 KVOR. Welcome in. Glad to have you on KVOR today exclusively due to the NCAA tournament continuing on Extra Sports 1300. And we'll talk a little tourney coming up in just a little bit. Of course, there is another way that you can consume the show on a daily basis, and it applies regardless of which radio station I am on a daily basis, and that is wherever you scroll. The show streams live, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at 740 KVOR or at Extra Sports 1300. While you're there, like, subscribe, comment. Most importantly, comment, because this is an interactive experience. If you would like to reach out via a more traditional way, you can always call or text the show at 719-247-1313. The Broncos pulled it off, didn't they? This week, landing Jalen Waddle in a blockbuster trade from the Miami Dolphins. They give up a bevy of picks, including basically all of their premium draft capital this year, so we can kind of put to the side in terms of the Broncos the draft talk, can't we? Although that's the last few years, that's a more that's the place we've been in more with the Denver Broncos, right? Ever since the Russell Wilson trade, haven't been a lot of moments where you eagerly are anticipating what the Broncos may do with their draft picks. Now, just see Les Snead if you want kind of my take on the Broncos giving up so many draft picks for Jalen Waddle, and I'll put it in a more family-friendly way. When you are a team in the place that the Denver Broncos are, where you got so close to the game that you set out at the beginning of the year to get to, the way that you try to ensure that you'll get there the next year is not with who you draft. There's a utility to the draft. Certainly you can add difference makers in the draft, but not where the Denver Broncos were drafting. In fact, kind of my thought on the draft for the Broncos is just fortify the depth in the trenches. Offensive linemen, defensive linemen, look there. There are a lot of starting spots, if you will, accounted for when it comes to the Denver Broncos. Who are you going to get at 30? That's going to move the needle, and that's what played into the frustration from so many Broncos fans. And I think if you were a Broncos fan, you had every right to be frustrated with the start of free agency. Every other team hits the ground running, and 2 days later, the only team that had yet to acquire someone from outside the organization was the Denver Broncos. But now you get the full picture, and those restructuring of contracts that happened last week were a precursor to the Jalen Waddle trade. They opened up the cap space at that time so they could then absorb Jalen Waddle's contract. Now, could they have done it earlier? Yes. And that restructuring just kind of was on its own island. And I theorized last week that maybe this is them getting ready to make a move, but then nothing happened. The rest of that day and the next day and the next day, it was crickets. But now we see that's exactly what the Denver Broncos were getting ready to do, opening up the cap space. And part of the motivation from Miami's side is financial. Right? What they had to do in order to move off of Tua and bring in Malik Willis. I don't want to say Jalen Waddle was a cap casualty. They would have figured it out if they did not get the asking price they received from the Denver Broncos, they would have figured it out. But there is a financial component to why Miami did this. But this was the Denver Broncos moving like they have moved. Really, and I want to go beyond even the Sean Payton. Sean Payton, they've been very tight-lipped. But even George Payton has done some things. Like, we were all on Aaron Rodgers right before the Russell Wilson deal happened. So this is an organization, even before Sean Payton arrived, with George Payton at the helm, that liked to keep things as quiet as they could. And then Sean Payton came in and said, "You're too loud. Even this is too loud for my taste." And sure, you saw rumors and NFL insiders opining that the Denver Broncos were a team to watch. Some of them have been pretty spot on reporting on the Sean Payton regime. But that's all it was. Right? In the end, it was normal off-season chatter. And then the Broncos make the move, and the timing of it, because of everything that happened, made it all the more of a shock. The Broncos were doing nothing, and then all of a sudden, they pull off certainly the most significant trade of the offseason, and I'll put it just slightly above the Ravens landing Trey Hendrickson as the most significant addition. And the most significant addition that really does move the needle. And I'll compare it to what's going on in Kansas City right now. Like, Kenneth Walker is one of the most impactful additions by any team. That was a huge get for Kansas City to land Kenneth Walker, and a big get for Kansas City to keep him away from Denver. But here's the problem that Kansas City finds itself still facing. And I tweeted this out when the news broke of Jalen Waddle. You have Jalen Waddle, who's a bona fide number one wide receiver that is on one side for the Broncos. You have now what is the best number two receiver in the league in Cortland Sutton on the other, and Kansas City doesn't have a single corner to cover either one of them. So what separates Jalen Waddle from some of these other additions that teams have made is how it is truly just adding to what already existed. What the Chiefs are doing, they're tearing down one side to build up the other, and then they're going to try in the draft to compensate and go the other way and get this thing leveled out when the season rolls along. Broncos kept that foundation intact by bringing back all of these internal free agents. And I'm not going to sit here and say that, especially at inside linebacker, that I still agree with everything that Denver did. But you know that regardless of what combination at that position they brought back, that was that they weren't going to get worse at that position, right? That's kind of what they started free agency doing, was let's keep the foundation intact. And now, so we're not going to be on paper any worse than we were a year ago. And that's the thing. When I talked about the Broncos regressing and stuff, it wasn't about that the Broncos were getting worse because they were losing players that would make them worse. It was that in order to get better, you got to get better. And what I mean by that is the teams that stand still get worse. If you're not getting better, you're getting worse. And that's what the reality was for the Denver Broncos. They were in a situation where they would have to improve their team. But the order of operations was, let's get all these guys back in house, keep the foundation there, and then we'll add on top of it. Right? That's what made the Max Crosby deal before it all fell through. Such a amazing addition for Baltimore Ravens, because you look at the team and you say, well, they should be better than they were this year. They still have Lamar Jackson. Still have Kyle Hamilton and some other pieces. And then they just added on top of it with one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. And when that physical didn't go the right way, which is a bold-faced lie, the Ravens got cold feet and backed out of it. Max Crosby intimated as much. They pivoted to Trey Hendrickson and kind of did the same thing. They made out in some ways even better because they didn't have to give up all that draft capital. Adding DJ Moore in Buffalo kind of did the same thing. But what Jalen Waddle does for the Denver Broncos, I just look at how I almost think the impact it has around him is as significant, if not more, than just what Jalen Waddle brings to the table on his own, which is elite deep threat ability and ability to make plays closer line of scrimmage in the screen game and help the Denver Broncos stay ahead of the chains in that regard. But what it's going to do for Courtland Sutton and Marvin Mims, I think if I'm a Broncos fan, I would love that as much as I would love just what Jalen Waddle brings to the table. And that's why I think it's the best addition any team has made, because, one, it absolutely addresses the biggest need of a team. Two, it allows everybody else to be more in roles that are better for them. And three, you're adding him while not losing anything. And I said at the start of the show, I'll reiterate it here. You may be already here, but Broncos are the team to beat in the AFC West. And they may, when all is said and done, when we get to the season, be the team to beat in the AFC. That's how impactful this move is. And this is why you pay what the Broncos paid, because they knew that Jalen Waddle could make this kind of a difference. Didn't think it was going to happen. We knew they were calling Miami leading up to the trade deadline, no go, not doing anything in free agency, and then all of a sudden, boom. Jalen Waddle, Denver Bronco, and the guy that is probably the happiest of anybody, Pat Surtain. He's got one of his Bama buddies on the team. Should that be a t-shirt, the Bama buddies? But the other, if you spin this forward and you say, okay, what now for the Denver Broncos? They made the big move. Where do they go? I don't know that there is anywhere they can go. Right? You spent all this draft capital to get Jalen Waddle. So what are you going to get of significance in the trade market? Free agency is basically over. And your draft, you're not drafting in a great position, but this is what George Payton loves. George Payton loves himself some late day 2, early day 3 picks. And that's where he's got to work. But I think the name that immediately comes to mind is not an addition of any kind. I think it just becomes now you got to get Jahdae Barron right. There are a lot of reasons why Barron didn't hit in his first season, and a lot of them are okay, right? Not every rookie, even one that fell to the Broncos, is ready to make an impact. Now, I don't drink the Kool-Aid so much to say that the secondary was so good that Jahdae Barron could not get any time. I think there is some of Jahdae Barron not separating himself. I think that spot opposite Pat Surtain is open. And the next spot for the Broncos to be better this next season is getting Barron to the level that he could play the big picture that they saw when they drafted him out of Texas comes to fruition. And maybe you spend Riley Moss off and get some draft capital, a few more bites at another bite at the apple in April. But they bring back McMillan, who's had a season, and this was one of the things that kind of played into Jahdae Barron not having the impact that you may have thought he was going to in year one. Jaquan McMillan, pretty good. But I think if you have a secondary of Surtain, Barron, and McMillan with the safeties, I think that's kind of the next place I'm looking at. I don't know that it's any outside addition. And that's what I was saying with the Denver Broncos. Like, it's not like they have to get a bunch of guys. And that added, I think, to the frustration of the inactivity that the Broncos had at the start of free agency. It's like you don't need everything. You need like this one thing or these one or two things. That's all you were asking of the Denver Broncos. And they weren't doing it. They didn't need to go out and get linemen and defensive linemen and linebackers and corners and wide receivers and running backs. And they needed a difference maker on offense. And they bring back J.K. Dobbins, and I'll say the same thing I said when that news broke. Just hope he stays healthy. That is an area of risk, certainly for the Denver Broncos. But when J.K. Dobbins was on the field, he was good. But you look in hindsight, yeah, it was going to be a receiver if they were going to make a move. Because Davis Webb may bring more balance, but it's still Sean Payton's offense, and it's still Sean Payton's team. And he clearly wanted to upgrade in the passing game. And he did. 719-24-7. 1313. Take your thoughts on the Broncos acquiring Jalen Waddle. Where do you put them in the pecking order in the AFC? I put them right at the top. I think that this move is that significant. Coming up next, a little tourney talk. And what has been the story of the tournament. High Point, coached by a former CSU Ram. How are you enjoying the tournament there so far? We've gotten a little, I think, some bits and pieces of some good stuff, what we come to expect in March. One thing I didn't buy going in was the idea that this year it was going to be rife with upsets. Last year we had one of the chalkiest tournaments that we've ever seen, and somehow it was supposed to flip the other way. And I think it just shows that I don't know that there's a full understanding, and it might just be because it's too early, full understanding of what NIL, the portal, all this kind of stuff is going to do. We're still not into the long term yet in college basketball. But what I've always felt it's going to do, there are going to be more haves than we've ever had before in college athletics. But the separation between the haves and the have-nots was going to be greater. Well, in college football, that doesn't really register with a lot of people because the haves are in the Big Ten and the SEC, and we still have enough of these big-time schools to talk about, and we have the debates over who should be in the college football playoff, which is far fewer teams than the NCAA tournament is. But in college basketball, what that means is the upsets are going to be even more rare. The way they seed these things, you're just not going to get it, because one big thing that helped Cinderella over the years was teams that were old. Right? St. Peter's and UMBC and some of these Cinderella stories, they were older teams that had played together, and they had an advantage over these power schools that prioritize the one and dones. But now with the portal and everything, these power schools are getting older. These teams are getting older. That advantage is being negated. So I didn't see that a switch was going to be flipped and all of a sudden we were going to have complete and utter chaos. I think what you have to do if you're a fan of the tournament is just relish the upsets that happen even more, because they're going to continue to be more infrequent because of what I just explained, but also because of the way that the tournament is going. Nobody is going to look at LSU knocking off Duke as this massive upset. It's the mid-majors that make it that way. Well, the direction college basketball is going, they're going to push those mid-majors out more and more and more. So when you get a story like High Point, it needs to be amplified, needs to be blown up. People need to go crazy over something like this, because it's rare for this tournament, and it's going to continue to be rare. So what High Point did, knocking off Wisconsin, that may go down as the biggest upset of the tournament. And I know VCU also knocked off North Carolina. But VCU, it's also, again, with the mid-majors, but there's also like you remember VCU with Shaka Smart, if you're of a certain age, which you don't have to be that old to remember when Shaka Smart was leading VCU. But like there's some brand recognition, the out-of-nowhere team you've never heard of, those are going to be in rare supply, even though VCU deserves a ton of credit for knocking off North Carolina. But High Point, that's the wheelhouse. Who knows where High Point is? I still don't. And I had no idea that their coach is a CSU Ram. Flynn Clayman, which also has to be one of the best names for a college coach. His High Point team takes down Wisconsin, and he used that platform to go on a righteous crusade for the little guy in college basketball.
It's pretty obvious to me that something needs to be done about this non-conference scheduling. High Point and Miami, Ohio are 2-0 in quad one games. We couldn't get games. They couldn't get games. Akron couldn't get games. UNCW couldn't get games. Belmont couldn't get games. We won 22 of our last 23 games, and we didn't move up one spot in the metrics. Not one. We won 22 of our 23. We've won 25 games by double digits. That team right there is a fantastic team that beat 5 top 10 teams. If we can get games like this on neutral courts and some home games, I think we'd know who's really the best teams. I'm proud of these dudes, and we're not just here to win one game. We're here to get to the Sweet 16.
And we'll find out whether they can get to the Sweet 16. And he's right. Flynn Clayman is right. You know, what's interesting about Miami of Ohio, you know, they talk about, oh, they didn't play anybody. That's the counter argument. Who wants to play Miami of Ohio had to come here. I called that game this year when Miami of Ohio, who went on to go 31-0, they came to Clune Arena and played Air Force. Like, those are the games they have to get. Those are the teams that are willing to play them. Flynn Clayman is absolutely right. These big schools, and this happens in football too, right? And we always point at Alabama, right? Alabama, what's the school that we always say they play? McNeese, and it's not McNeese State. But like, Alabama is the poster child for this, right? All of a sudden they fill one of their non-conference matchups with some team they're going to beat by 60. It's like, play a good group of 5 team, Alabama. And it's the same thing in college basketball. And because college basketball is so, the way they see the tournament with football, you can do the eye test. Yeah, we bring in the resume and some of this stuff, but it's largely like you know who is deserving of getting in, and you only have to pick out so many teams, right? Well, with a field of now 68 and soon to be more, how in the world are you going to be able to watch enough college basketball? We don't even think that the College Football Playoff Committee watches enough football to see that tournament, let alone asking the selection committee to watch High Point games and Miami of Ohio games and Queens College games. But you have to rely on the metrics. Well, the problem is, if these mid-majors can't get games against the best teams, then to Flynn Clayman's point, they're not going to move up even if they run roughshod through their schedule. It's not going to matter. So this is that age-old access thing. The mid-majors deserve more access. They deserve to get to play. I'm not saying that Flynn Clayman should be welcoming the 5 best teams onto his home court, but play them. He said they had 1 quad 1 game and they won. Miami of Ohio had 1 quad 1 game and won. I don't go so far as to say that Duke has to go to High Point, but they should invite High Point to Duke. These bigger schools should want that challenge. They clearly don't. Because it's the same with football. It's all downside for them. So it's just, you make a good of the game argument. And with so many games, it just, you would think that more schools had the good of the game in mind, at least a little bit. Like football, I get it. It's finite. You only have a few. Everyone wants to get ready with the Powder Puff game to start the season, and you have your own. Well, even like Air Force, I know they're not a power school, but they got Army and Navy every year, and that limits the teams they can bring in. It should be easier for college basketball to do this. And I saw Paulie, the producer for the Dan Patrick Show on Extra Sports 1300, him suggesting that if a lower seed, like a High Point, knocks off Wisconsin, then Wisconsin has to schedule High Point the next year. Not enforceable, never going to happen. I love the idea. Brings a little juice to the non-conference, right? That matchup for Badger fans is going to mean something. And it's an easy way to give these mid-majors access. You get into the tournament by winning your conference and you knock off a power school. That's a game you have scheduled set in stone the next year. I love it. It's never going to happen. And on the theme of it's never going to happen, the utopia that Flynn Clayman is pushing for, rightly, it's never going to happen either. The expansion of the tournament is to squeeze out more teams like that. The Mountain West got a team in, one, and that was Utah State, who after this year isn't even going to be a Mountain West team anymore. But they got one team in. That's going to be the Mountain West's reality moving forward. You're going to have to win that tournament. And maybe if you get a different winner between the regular season and the tournament, maybe you can get a second team in. But the expansion, all of this stuff that is happening with this tournament, it's moving to favor those at the big boys table. Bruce Pearl is going to be very happy because his son at Auburn is going to be put in over a Miami of Ohio. They're going to keep moving in that direction. And what they're going to use to argue for it, not as if they need an argument because they're the power brokers, they can do basically what they want, but they're going to use, we're going to hold up High Point and say, these mid-majors, they can ball. And these Power 4 teams, stop being scared of playing them. Schedule them. But the power brokers in college basketball are going to, we hold up High Point, they're going to hold up Miami of Ohio, who got boat raced by Tennessee today. They're sitting back with a smug look on their face, I'm sure, saying, see, you guys all cried for Miami of Ohio, wanted them in. They deserve to be in, da-da-da-da-da. And look at them. They played their way into the tournament, fair enough. Their first real tournament game, they got the brakes beat off of them. And I swear it's what the selection committee uses against the Mountain West. Because I remember the Mountain West used to have multiple teams in, and not multiple like two, like 3, 4 teams used to get in. And then they would go into the tournament and they'd get beat soundly. And I swear that no one can convince me otherwise that run of 2, 3, 4 years where the Mountain West was getting some good representation in the tournament, and they in some ways squandered it, and the selection committee was like, yeah, we're not taking more Mountain West teams than we need to. And they haven't for the last few years, even though one of them, San Diego State, did play for a national championship not that long ago. I love what Flynn Clayman is saying. I hope they make the Sweet 16. It's going to be real tough. Don't they play Arkansas? The access is going to become even more limited, more and more as we move forward. You can hate it. I kind of hate it. Like it's funny when it comes to college football. I am kind of an elitist. Like I'll wear that because when you this is really before they expanded. I think I've kind of evolved a little bit as they've expanded. If you're going to expand the field beyond what it should be expanded to, which is what the college football playoff is doing, then I want more access. I don't want this to be the Big Ten SEC Invitational. When it was 4 teams, I'm all for it. Keep out the little guy. I don't care. I want the 4 best teams. But with college basketball, my God, it's 68 teams. The second best team in the Mount West should get a spot over the 9th best SEC team. Miami of Ohio should be in over Auburn. My God, what are we doing here? It's 68 teams, plenty of access, but they're not going to. And they're gonna hold up what happened in Miami of Ohio and what's happening throughout this tournament, and it's probably going to outweigh. It's going to be more on their side than what we have on our side, which is High Point and VCU. It's a sad reality. I mean, you want to lament NIL and the transfer portal and all that kind of stuff. I think one of the worst things that's happening in college sports is the lack of access and the separation here, and how the schools at the mid-major level in every sport are just being moved further and further away to the point where, I mean, I saw today this week on Twitter again, somebody suggesting that the NIT becomes the mid-major tournament. I don't think anybody wants that. But I think it's in the college football playoff, same way. College football playoff, no Mount West, no Pac-12, no AAC. Go play your own tournament. But congratulations to former CSU Ram Flynn Clayman and High Point, which I still don't know where High Point is. But that's what we love about March, right? 1, we don't know where these schools are from. And 2, we're too busy to even look it up. We have computers in our hands. And we don't even want to take the time to look it up. Or maybe that's just a me problem. 719-24-7-1313. Back after this. The NCAA tournament continuing on Extra Sports 1300. But other basketball is going to be played tonight. The Denver Nuggets are going against the Toronto Raptors, which is a sneaky, don't let your preconceived notions of the Raptors lead you to believe this is not an important game. This is a game that the Denver Nuggets could use as a bit of a measuring stick, although that's a weird thing to say when the Nuggets are supposedly one of the best teams in the league. But Toronto, I saw a stat from Dan Hyatt, terrific stat guru on the NBA side of things, that says some of the underlying metrics with the Toronto Raptors has them in the same boat as the Pistons and the Spurs and the Thunder. Maybe not at their level, but kind of in the same general vicinity, especially in clutch time. Something that has been a problem for the Denver Nuggets. And I just say all that to say that Toronto's a good team. So this is a good spot for a bounce back for the Denver Nuggets after that garbage that they put up against Memphis the other night. And again, the clock is ticking, right? The clock is ticking. There isn't much time for David Adelman and the Denver Nuggets to figure this thing out and to look like a title contender. I keep saying, like, I think that title contender is in there. I think that in a world where it's not OKC getting out of the West, it's Denver. I still believe that, but they're running out of time to show that. And I think there is somebody that can come to the rescue. And that is Nikola Jokic with a fresh fade. If you don't know the lore behind this, Nikola Jokic tends to play his best when he looks his best with a clean haircut. Don't we all? In fact, I probably need to get some of this salad chopped off in the coming days. But Nikola, headband Jokic, fresh fade Jokic. There are these different versions of Nikola Jokic where you could say when this happens, this is what normally brings out the best in him. And anecdotally, when Nikola Jokic gets his haircut, I promise you he'll be on the Altitude broadcast tonight. I promise you. We go to Katie Wingy for the sideline report, and she will bring up that Nikola Jokic got a haircut and probably back it up with some statistical information to show that he's very good after he gets a haircut. In all seriousness, I think at this point, the only thing that the Nugget, and again, Pate wants him back. He's not coming back tonight, but he'll be back soon. Yeah, that will help a little bit. But even getting Aaron Gordon back hasn't quite helped the way you were hoping it would. And I feared this a little bit. I said that it's getting to the point where Aaron Gordon is not the cure for every ill that the Nuggets suffer from. And sure enough, back comes Aaron Gordon. Yeah, it's better. But are you still feeling that championship fever? Are you feeling like there's a parade in the Nuggets' future? Here's the best thing at the nexus of being the best thing and also being possible at this point. Because you have to balance that, right? There are some best things that the Nuggets could be or best version of certain players. That would be great, but are you truly going to get that? Someone who is capable is Nikola Jokic. I think the only thing between now and the end of the season, which we got what, a dozen, 11, 10 games, something like that, left in the regular season. I think Nikola Jokic, and here we are asking too much of the guy, but he always seems to rise to the challenge. I think he needs to go galactic down the stretch of this season. I think we're at the point where the only thing that can lead you to truly believe that the Denver Nuggets are capable of winning a title this year is if Nikola Jokic just absolutely decimates every team that is in the way of the Denver Nuggets between now and the end of the regular season. There has to be some kind of extra gear that this Nuggets team shows, I think, to get people to buy back in. And the realistic one, I don't know if it's in clutch time. We thought we got it against San Antonio, right? The clutch time woes, not a problem anymore. Yeah, they were. That still. I think if Jokic goes on a monster run, maybe it could make, as an aside, make that MVP conversation a little bit more interesting. But more importantly, it would make you go, okay, like, the Nuggets still have the best player in the world who's capable of dominating on a nightly basis. That's what the Denver Nuggets need tonight and moving forward. I just don't see that something else is going to pop with this team between now and the end of the season that will get you to buy back in if you are somewhat out on the Denver Nuggets. So we'll see if Nikola Jokic with a fresh fade helps.